Go ahead and begin. Welcome to today's telephone town hall with Senator John Walsh. I'm Andrea Helling, Senator Walsh's Deputy Chief of Staff. We're going to be discussing the issues important to you. So if you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 to get into the line. Right now we're dialing out to thousands of people from around Montana to join tonight's conversation. In just a moment, we'll be hearing from Senator Walsh and taking your questions live. If you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh's live telephone town hall with folks across Montana. In a moment, we'll hear from Senator Walsh on the work he is doing in the Senate and his travel around Montana. Throughout the call, if you have a question you'd like to ask the Senator, press 0 to get in line. Senator Walsh will take as many questions as possible tonight. In just a moment, we'll start taking your questions live for Senator John Walsh's telephone town hall conversation. If you have a question, go ahead and press 0 at any point to get in line. Before we do that, though, we want to do a quick poll of everyone on the call to find out a little bit more about your priorities. What do you think is the most pressing issue Senator Walsh should be addressing in Washington, D.C.? Press 1 if it's unemployment in the economy. Press 2 if it's taking care of our veterans. Press 3 if it's the federal debt. Press 4 if it's expanding access to public lands. Press 5 if these issues are of equal importance. Again, press 1 if it's unemployment in the economy. Press 2 if it's taking care of our veterans. Press 3 if it's the federal debt. Press 4 if it's expanding access to public lands. Press 5 if these issues are of equal importance. Thanks for participating. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Walsh for some opening remarks. And remember, if you want to ask a question at any point tonight, press 0 to get in line.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks to everyone on the phone for taking the time to be on this call. I want to take this opportunity to provide you an update on the issues I've been working on in the Senate. We've got folks on the line from around Montana, and I'm going to open it up to some questions in just a moment. So if you'd like to ask a question, press 0 now to get in the queue. We have hunters, anglers, hikers, kayakers, conservationists, bird watchers, rock climbers, and outdoor enthusiasts on the line tonight with us. So I want to share an update about my work in the Senate to protect Montana's heritage. Growing up in Butte, America, I woke up every day under the morning shadow of the Continental Divide, part of the Deer Lodge National Forest. As a kid, my dad would take me fishing on the Big Hole River. Just last week, I joined some other Montanans to fish the Clark Fork. As an adult serving the Montana National Guard, I would ride my mountain bike almost daily all over the trails in Helena National Forest to connect to the streets of our capital city. That's why I'm protecting our public lands and expanding access is so important to me. Today, I introduced legislation to make it harder to sell off Montana public lands. My bill will create a budget point of order in the Senate to block attempts to sell off public lands to pay for Congress's bills. There's a theory circulating in some parts of the West that the federal government has a continuing duty to dispose of its lands in the western states. What this really means is handing over our most popular recreation areas to the highest out-of-state bidder. That's good for the copper barons and trophy home developers, but it's bad for the rest of us. This theory is as radical as it is wrong, as court rulings have repeatedly found. Our colleagues in the House of Representatives have passed a budget that could sell off millions of acres of public land, our land, in Montana. I pledge to you that I will fight any attempts to sell off our public lands. But protecting our public lands goes beyond just making sure irresponsible members of Congress don't sell them off. It is also about protecting our access to those public lands. That's why I introduced the Keeping Public Lands Open Act to make sure that if our government is ever shut down again, we can still access public lands we own, our refugees and our national parks. Everywhere I travel in Montana, I hear from sportsmen about the need to protect Montana's outdoor heritage, access to public land, clean air and water, and our Second Amendment rights. That's why I'm championing Made in Montana solutions like the North Fork Watershed Protection Act, the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act, and the Forest Jobs and Recreation Act. After hearing some folks in Carbon County talk about why East Rosebud Creek is also important, I introduced legislation to designate it as a wild and scenic river. I'm pushing for legislation that would fully and permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which has protected so many places in Montana for sportsmen forever. I've also co-sponsored legislation to make it easier for farmers and ranchers to place conservation easements on private land. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I'm pushing for the conservation title in the Farm Bill to be implemented in a way that rewards Montana's leadership in block management and partners with private landowners to provide access for hunting. So again, if you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh. I'm holding a live telephone town hall with folks from across Montana. So if you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 now. Unfortunately, a lot is broken here in Washington right now, and no one wants to show real leadership to address the challenges we face. We must get our debt and deficit under control and finally balance our budget. But that won't happen if Congress keeps taking extended breaks. That's why I introduced the Do Your Job Act, to keep Congress in session until we pass a balanced budget. That's also why I introduced major legislation to save taxpayer dollars and improve our national security by getting rid of our reliance on service contractors overseas. The U.S. has spent over $2 trillion on service contractors over the last 13 years. Those contractors cost American taxpayers much more than if our own men and women in uniform performed those same services. This is one of my proposals to cut our spending in a responsible way. If you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh. I'm holding a live telephone town hall conversation with Montanans. So if you'd like to ask a question, press 0 to get in the queue. As I mentioned, I've been traveling around Montana and hearing from folks from all over the state about what's on their minds. Everywhere I go, I hear about the concern about our nation's debt and the need to create jobs, about the need to protect our civil liberties and privacy, and about the importance of using Montana-made solutions to protect our clean air, clean water, and access to public lands. I know the need to make responsible decisions to cut government spending, create jobs, protect our freedoms, to hold Washington accountable. I hear from parents and teachers about the importance of making sure our national education policies work for our rural communities and that our kids can afford to go to college. And I hear the concern about the government trampling on our civil liberties. From the bulk data collection to the FBI's gag letters demanding personal information, Montanans are rightly concerned that government is trampling on our constitutional rights. That's why my very first bill was the Civil Liberties Protection Act, to rein in the government's abusive surveillance practices. But Montanans' concerns about civil liberties also extend to equality. That's why I'm supporting the Paycheck Fairness Act, to ensure that women are paid equally for equal work. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 to get into the queue. Tonight, I hope to hear directly from you and get a sense of your priorities. Again, to ask a question, press 0 to get in line. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. With that, we'll go to questions. Andrea?
Thank you very much, Senator. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0 to get in line, and the Senator will take as many questions as possible this evening. Our first question comes from Aaron in Miles City. Aaron, you're live on the line with the Senator, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Senator. I was wondering why they keep going after veterans benefits, retired veterans benefits, medically retired veterans benefits, and haven't even once looked at the politicians and past politicians' benefits and how much they're costing the United States.
Well, Aaron, that's a great question. I hope you know, but I am also a veteran. I served for 33 years, the Montana National Guard. I commanded an infantry battalion in Iraq in 2004 and 2005. And so I'm definitely going to be looking after our veterans and make sure that the benefits that they and their families have earned are there for them when they need them. You know, there's no question that Washington has a spending problem, but many members of Congress have the wrong answers to reduce spending. Selling public lands or cutting benefits to veterans that have earned it is the wrong way to balance the budget. I was proud earlier this year to support restoring a cost of living increase for our veterans. I understand the importance of keeping our commitment to men and women who put their name on the line. You know, we need to find a better way to save money, and I believe one way to do that would be to pass my CUTS Act. What the CUTS Act will do is, since September of 2002, we have spent over $2 trillion on service contracts within the Department of Defense. So what I would like to do is roll that service over the next 5 years to 10 years, roll service contracts back to the level that they were in 2002. You know, we've taken a lot of positions and jobs that were being conducted by our military members and have contracted those jobs out, and it's costing the taxpayers a significant more amount of money. So I know there are ways that we can reduce spending within the Department of Defense, and we shouldn't have to do it on the back of our men and women who have served. And we have a commitment and a promise that we've made to those men and women that we need to keep. So, Aaron, thank you for your question, and I'm assuming you're a veteran, so thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Senator. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask the Senator a question tonight on any topic, simply press 0 to get in line. Our next question comes from Tim in Shelby. Tim, you are live on the line with the Senator. You can ask your question.
Yes, hello.
Yes, Tim, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My question is the revenue in Montana. It's, why can't we get more revenue brought into the state? I live in Shelby, Montana, and I don't know if you're aware of the area up here, but we have, in Toole County, we have a large number of windmills. Here in Shelby, we're building an industrial park, which is the hub for the north, south, east, and west. It's bringing in transportation from Great Falls to Canada and from the east and the west coast. And why can't we do more for the people in the state by doing something of this nature?
Great question. I really enjoy spending time in Shelby. You guys you really are the leaders when it comes to, being progressive and doing things to spur your economy in the Shelby area. With regard to selling off our public lands to raise money to pay Washington's bills, I stand firmly against selling off our public lands, and because it will eliminate access to hunting and fishing, hiking, and areas that we cherish so much. We want to make Montana a special place, so that's why I introduced legislation to protect our public lands. I just did that today, and we are going to, it will require the Senate to have a vote of 60 members in order to pass that legislation to allow us to sell off public lands. I'm not sure if you know it or not, but the Ryan budget that has been passed for the past 2 years authorizes the sale of public lands to pay down our national debt. Really what we need to do, Washington has a spending problem. We need to find ways to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse from government spending. If you were on the line just a minute ago, I talked about the CUTS Act. I've spent 33 years in the Department of Military Affairs. I know that there are areas within the Department of Defense that we can cut spending and still maintain a strong national security posture. So there are a lot of ways that we can cut spending here in Washington, D.C., and not have to worry about, so much of a focus on what's happening at the state level. I want to make sure that the hubs like the one in Shelby are exactly the kind of infrastructure we should be funding. So I also sit on the Commerce Committee as a member of that committee, and we'll be looking at communities like Shelby as models for how the rest of the country can continue to grow, as well as other areas in Montana. So appreciate the call, and thanks for the question.
As a reminder, if you'd like to ask Senator Walsh a question tonight on this live telephone town hall with folks across Montana, simply press 0 to get in line. Our next question this evening comes from Vincent in Great Falls. Go ahead, Vincent, to ask a question of Senator Walsh. You're live on the line.
Yes, Senator. I have a number of concerns. One of the things is for, 50 years our country's been talking about energy independence, and we're on the verge of it, and it's not because the government, and you keep talking about all the things that you're trying to get the government to do, and our energy independence has been hindered by the government, not by industry in our states. We could have a duplicate of the Bakken go on in Montana if it wasn't for the restrictions that are being placed on federal lands by the Congress and the administration. And I'm concerned that you're going to keep supporting Harry Reid and his craziness.
Well, Vincent, I can tell you that I'm not. I know who I work for, and that's the citizens of Montana. I don't work for the president. I don't work for the leader of the United States Senate. I work on behalf of the citizens of Montana, and I know that if I'm not representing the citizens well, then they will vote me out of office, and I'll come home. So I understand what's important to Montanans. When I travel around the state, I hear about creating more. What can we do to create more and better paying jobs? And so, that's why I have gone up against the administration to approve the Keystone Pipeline. I strongly support the Keystone Pipeline, and I have a bill to remove the president from this process, to immediately approve and start the construction of the pipeline. What it would also do in the future is it will take the president out of the decision-making process with regard to infrastructure projects on the international borders. That would be able to be approved by the Secretary of State's office and the Congress, and it would keep the president out of the process, which would remove a little bit, I believe, take the political actions away from those decisions. So, I'm supportive of jobs. I understand the Bakken has been produced in Montana, and that's mostly about how rich the formation is in Montana versus North Dakota. So we need to, it's kind of like the lake. The lake is deeper in the North Dakota portion, deeper in North Dakota with regard to the Bakken than it is into the Montana sector. So we know we have oil and natural gas in those areas, and we just have to continue to focus on it. That's 150 million barrels of light sweet crude produced right in Montana rather than in places like Russia or Saudi Arabia. The last thing that I ever want to do is to send any more of our young men and women from Montana or this country to the Middle East to fight for on behalf of oil. So we have to find ways to become energy independent in this country, and I am going to support anything that will do that, no matter what the president says or what Harry Reid says, because I'm hearing from Montanans that we have an abundance of natural resources in our state, and I want to support the development of those resources as long as we do it responsible. I'm not sure if you know or not, but I'm from Butte, Montana. I grew up about 6 blocks from the Berkeley Pit, so we need to make sure when we're developing these natural resources that we do it responsibly. So appreciate the question, and you can count on me to support Montanans and not the president or Harry Reid.
Thank you very much, Senator. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask Senator Walsh a question this evening, press 0 to get in line. Our next question tonight comes from Jerry Ann in Troy. Jerry Ann, you are live on the line with the Senator, and you can ask your question.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for taking our questions tonight. I don't know that I really have a question more than I would just like you to know that those of us here on the western side of the state would really appreciate any help and support you could give us in the logging and mining industries. Those have faded immensely over on our side, and we're plentiful in hunting, plentiful in recreation, but the saying over here is you can't eat the scenery. And anyways, it seems like we really have a hard time getting our logging sales up and running because they're constantly getting litigated, and we've got a couple of mines over here we would like to see operating so some of the young folks could continue to stay in this area and keep our schools up and running. And anyways, just appreciate your support in some of those areas over here on the western side.
You bet, Jerry Ann, and thanks for those comments. I'm frustrated right along with you by the underlying, lawsuits that are taking place. Our forests have been hammered by mountain pine beetles and by litigation. One great tool that Congress recently passed was in the Farm Bill, and I strongly support using it to increase logging in our overgrown and beetle-killed forests. The Forest Service needs to embrace this new tool in order to keep our forests healthy and our mills running. I also, like I mentioned on the previous to the previous caller, I was born and raised in Butte. My father worked for the Anaconda Company. I'm proud of where I came from and my heritage, and so we need to continue to focus on natural resource development. You know, while I was serving as Montana's lieutenant governor, I worked with a mining company that was mining garnet over near Alder, Montana, and they were having problems with, you know, there were some issues between the mine and the state of Montana's Department of Environmental Quality. But when we sat the two down and kind of focused on what had to be done, so that everybody knew what had to be done, and we started working towards the problem, we were able to get that mine open within about 2 or 3 months, you know, of the problem being identified. That mine created about 65 jobs at somewhere about $50,000 to $75,000 per job. You know, that's a big shot in the arm for the Alder, Sheridan, Montana community. You know, and with regard to mining, I'm also very hopeful the Troy mine can reopen soon, because they've done it right and have been good business for workers in Troy, Libby, and Sanders County. So I'm with you. I want to find ways to, you know, continue to bring jobs, especially in the natural resource development area, because we have natural resources in Montana. We just have to make sure that when we are developing those resources, that we do it properly. So, Jerry Ann, I appreciate the call, and you can count on my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, press 0 to get in line. We're going to keep taking as many questions as possible this evening. Our next question comes from Linda in Whitehall. Linda, you're live on the line, and you can ask your question.
Yes, I want to know what your view is on abortions and about all the federal land. Instead of selling it off, where it's been talked about, let the state buy all of it back in and be in control of it instead.
Well, Linda, let me talk the choice issue first. You know, I don't believe that the federal government should be in the doctor's office. You know, these decisions should be left to a woman, her family, and her faith. My wife, Janet, and I, we've been married for 29 years. Janet's been a diabetic for over 43 years. We have 2 wonderful children. Our oldest son, Michael, is 29. Our youngest son, Taylor, is 24. When both of our children were born, Janet had to be flown to Salt Lake City for our oldest son, and Seattle for our youngest son, and she was in the hospital for 4 to 5 months for each of our children. And the doctor came to us at both times and said that we may have to make difficult decisions. You know, fortunately, we didn't have to make those difficult decisions, but those decisions, I believe, you know, that's where my choice criteria came from, is that I believe, you know, that those decisions should be made by Janet and I and our doctor and our faith, and not the government. So we'll continue to I'll continue to support that and make sure that the government stays out of you know, women's health care decisions. You know, we need to also make sure that we actively manage our public lands, not to sell it or transfer it. You know, the concern that I have is that if we sell it back, you know, or the state takes control of this public lands, that the state will not be able to afford to manage it. And a good example is that when, you know, over the past several years, we've had forest fires that have, you know, had a heavy toll throughout the state of Montana. In the year of 2000, I was serving as the Plans, Operations, and Military Support Officer for the Montana National Guard, and we had over 1 million acres of land that were on fire. And we had to call in National Guard forces, active duty forces, resources from all over the state, from other states, and those fires were very expensive. You know, a fire season like that would break the state of Montana. You know, we just don't have the resources to deal with that. And even with the daily management of those resources, we would have to create a new agency within the state of Montana to manage the resources, and we don't have the funds to do it. So that's why I'm against you know, managing, you know, taking those lands back under the state control, because and I also believe that really the push behind taking those lands under the state, back into the state control, is that people who want to do this know that the state will not be able to afford that, and eventually will have to sell those lands off to the private sector. And then those of us who like to enjoy the outdoor heritage will have to pay to fish, pay to hunt, and pay for access. So I'm against taking, you know, the state taking control and managing the federal public lands.
Senator, tonight our next question comes from Mary in Butte. Mary, you're live on the line with the Senator, and you can ask your question.
Senator, I'd like to know what your position on women's rights are. We've seen all the negative ads. What's really going on?
With regards to women's rights, I'm a strong advocate of making sure that women are treated equally. I've supported the equal pay for equal work bill in the legislature. I want to make sure that women are paid equally for doing the same type of work that men are doing. While I was the Adjutant General of the state of Montana, I promoted the first 06 into a command position in the Montana National Guard. So I believe that it shouldn't matter on your race, your sex, your color, your age. That if you can do the job, you should be promoted into doing that job. So, but also within the military, there are some requirements. There's a hierarchy and an organizational structure that some positions, for example, in the top of the organization can only be should only be filled by senior personnel, like in the colonel rank, and sometimes young lieutenants and captains think that they should be in those positions. But there's a lot more that goes into deciding who should occupy these positions than just because you want those positions or you think you're qualified. But I can tell you that the majority of my office back here in Washington, D.C. is the top positions are occupied by females. For example, both my Chief of Staff and my Deputy Chief of Staff are female. They do a fantastic job, and I really learned a lot when I was coming up through the Montana National Guard. When I was a young lieutenant and a young captain, and I was competing with other males and females for positions in the organization, I always thought that in my own mind that I should have a position above most females because I thought I could do the job better. But then, as the higher up the organization I went, and into the higher leadership positions that I got, and I had the opportunity to watch males and females, working side by side, in jobs, I can tell you that I've been very impressed with the performance of females in the workforce. And so when I have the opportunity to select, I do not base that selection on whether you're a male or female, because I know the quality of work that you get out of a female. So thank you for that question. I appreciate the opportunity to answer.
As a reminder, if you have a question for Senator Walsh this evening, please press 0 to get in line. Our next question comes from Gerda in Dillon. Gerda, you are live on the line, and you can ask your question.
Good evening, Senator Walsh. I'm so glad to be able to speak to you. I was born and raised in Butte also, and I have good feelings there. My question is about Social Security and Medicare. The Social Security issue, I feel, is moot because we've paid into that and it was promised to us. Congress spent it, but it still was promised to us. But Medicare is a lifeline for many of us who are over 65. We need to have that. Is it secure?
Yeah, I tell you what, I believe. I've been traveling around the state of Montana and talking with, holding roundtable discussions with seniors, and the concern that you're addressing tonight is a concern that is addressed by a lot of Montanans. And I want you to know that I will never do anything while I'm serving in the United States Senate that will take away the benefits that you have been, that you've worked for and that you've paid into and that you've earned with regard to Social Security and Medicare. I want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to shore those programs up, to make sure that they are there for the people that are drawing on those programs now, as well as future generations. So I believe that is very important. And I know that there are ways that we can do it. For example, within Medicare, I know I sit on the Aging Committee, and we talk about the amount of Medicare fraud that is occurring in this, in this country. And we often, in our committee meetings, we refer to Miami, Florida as being ground zero for Medicare fraud. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year are being, frauded out of the Medicare system by people, setting up shop in garages in Miami, Florida, submitting the bills to into the Medicare system, receiving the check, and then before the agents can get out there to check on it, the shops are closed up. So we've got to do a better job of enforcement of fraud to make sure that that's not happening. And so that's just one area that I think that if we were able to eliminate, that would definitely help the program. Another area that we can look at to save money within Medicare is allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. I had an opportunity to visit with a doctor in Missoula a couple of months ago now, and he talked to me about the price of medication that he uses for two similar drugs. One he pays about $200 for. It's a vial of medication that he uses on 99% of his Medicare patients. And the other one is he pays about over $2,000 for. Well, the Medicare requirements require him to use the prescription that costs over $2,000. If he had the ability to use the one that costs $200, he said that doctors across the state of Montana would be able to save millions of, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, just in the state of Montana on Medicare costs. And so if we were able to do that across the country, so I think we need to take a look at doing that within the programs of both Social Security and Medicare, and make sure that we are shoring these programs up, because they are good programs. And I know people who, rely heavily on Social Security, and the people that I know who are receiving or on Medicare, think the program is a good program. So we need to focus on making sure that they are there for future generations. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Senator. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, remember to press 0 to get into the line. Our next question comes from Mavis in Eureka. Mavis, what is the question you have for Senator Walsh? Mavis, you're live on the line, but we can't hear you.
Okay. I don't think we should be sending our boys to Iraq.
What, Mavis? I agree with you there. Like I mentioned earlier, I was in the Montana National Guard for 33 years. I commanded an infantry battalion in Iraq in 2004 and 2005. I sent my son to Iraq twice. He's been a helicopter pilot one time, and then a C-12 fixed-wing aircraft pilot another time, and he was based out of Kuwait and flew all over the Middle East. While I was serving in the Montana National Guard as the Adjutant General, the entire time I was there, we had men and women that were deployed from the Montana Air National Guard and the Montana Army National Guard. So I know what it's like from deploying myself, deploying my son, and deploying other spouses and children to Iraq. So I think it's time for Iraq to stand up and take responsibility for their own country. And so I'm with you there. And right now, I do not foresee that there's a situation where I will support sending our men and women back to Iraq. I also support, bringing our men and women home from Afghanistan as quickly as possible. I do not support extending the, right now we have about 32,000 service members there, and they're talking about extending over 8,000 for another 2 to 5 to 10 years. And I do not support that either. It's time to bring our men and women home. We put these two wars on the credit card that has cost over $2 trillion we've spent put on the credit card. So thank you for your support to our men and women and caring for our citizens so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. If you have a question you'd like to ask the Senator tonight, please press 0 to get in line. Our next question comes from Kenneth in Helena. Kenneth, you are live on the line with the Senator, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, this is Ken Knapp in Helena, and I'm an ex-Marine, and I want to thank you for your service to the country. And I'm really disturbed by the accusations that have been made against you about not being able to run the financial affairs of the Montana National Guard. Could you please respond to that and clear that up? I would appreciate it, Senator Walsh.
You bet, Ken, and thanks for the question, and I appreciate you wanting to hear about that. You know, the first thing I want to tell you is that I will never apologize for standing up for the men and women of the Montana National Guard. And I can tell you that while serving in the United States Senate, I will fight on behalf of the men and women and the citizens of Montana as well. With regard to what happened while I was the TAG, the report was that I was serving on the board of directors of the National Guard Association of the United States, and I provided, you know, when I deployed to Iraq, we had thin-skinned armored vehicles when we deployed into Iraq. When we left Montana, went over to Iraq with over 700 men and women. We held a town hall conference where the Secretary of State came over, or not the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense came over to Iraq, and this was just before we were getting ready to deploy up into our forward operating base in northern Iraq. And Secretary Rumsfeld was there, and one of the young reserve component soldiers stood up and asked, why is it that our National Guard units have to, you know, drive up into the Iraq in our thin-skinned vehicles when our active duty men and women are driving up in heavy armored vehicles? And the answer that the Secretary gave was that you go to war with what you have. Well, when I came back and was serving as the Adjutant General of the state of Montana, it was my responsibility to make sure that the men and women that were deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan had the best equipment that was available, had the best training, and that we were doing everything we could to make sure that they were ready to go. So I wanted to make sure that they did that. And so the National Guard Association of the United States supports, is back here in Washington, working on behalf of the National Guard and the reserve components to make sure we have the best equipment. And so I sent out a letter to all the officers in the Montana National Guard telling them what the National Guard Association did and why I believed it was so important. And one young soldier filed an IG complaint, and you know, it was substantiated. And I told the you know, the men and women of the National Guard, or the IG, that I support, you know, what I did, and I'm going to never apologize for fighting on behalf of the men and women of the National Guard. And I never will, you know, do that as your senator as well. I will fight to make sure that the things that are important to Montana are looked out for. You know, sometimes it takes the courage to do what's right, and I believe I have the courage to do what's right. I also like to talk about the audit of the Department of Military Affairs. You know, when you're in the military, you get these IG inspections that come down and give you an inspection all the time. And so I looked at this inspection, or an audit, from the Legislative Auditor's Office in the same respect, that the Legislative Auditor's Office was coming in. They're going to look at you know, it was an outside set of eyes to look at our organization to see how things are going, and provide me with some tools to, if they identified that we can fix it. And so the Legislative Auditor's Office came in, identified 9 areas where we had deficiencies within the entire Department of Military Affairs. That included the Army National Guard, the Air National Guard, Veterans Affairs, Disaster and Emergency Services, the Youth Challenge Program, and you know, so it's over 1,200 full-time employees, 3,700 traditional soldiers. And so I took quick steps to fix the problem, to bring more accountability to the system. And the same audits were being conducted all over the United States, and these deficiencies were being identified in the majority of states, I would say. So, you know, sometimes when you're the leader of an organization, and you know, I learned this early on, the day that you take command of an organization, you're responsible for everything that happens, whether it's good or bad. And so, in this case, you know, as a leader of the Montana National Guard, problems were identified, I fixed them, and I moved on. So I'm proud. One thing I can tell you is that I'm very proud of my service in the Montana National Guard. 33 years commanding an infantry battalion in Iraq. Our unit was awarded the Valorious Unit Citation. So I'm very proud of my service, and I can tell you that the Montana National Guard was a better organization, or the entire Department of Military Affairs was in better shape the day that I handed it over to my the predecessor than the day that I took over. So thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm maybe a little longer-winded than you wanted to hear, but I think it's important that that information gets out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question tonight, we're getting through as many as possible. Just press 0 to get into the line. Our next question this evening comes from Greg in Bozeman. And Greg, you're live on the line and you can ask Senator a question.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for taking the time tonight. We're here listening to your call with my two sons, 6 and 9 years old, and they want to thank you for supporting the Rocky Mountain Heritage Act. I think that's a tremendous thing you're doing, as well as stopping Paul Ryan on his efforts. But what my question is for you is economic development's a big concern of mine here in the state, and I wanted to hear what your plan is to push on BNSF to help provide affordable train freight to our state for small and medium enterprises. Because as you know, it's really focused on the oil and coal industry right now in our state. And even the wheat farmers are having a tough time getting train cars out of here. So I just wanted to hear what you have going for that. And I also want to say that your female staff that I've met around our town are tremendous. So thank you also for them.
Greg, thank you very much. I can't think of a better ground-up example of public land legislation than the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act. It was a made-in-Montana solution to keep one of our most special areas in the state the way it is for future generations, so that your children, my grandchildren, can enjoy the Montana that we were able to grow up in and enjoy. I'm also proud to support and push to pass the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act and the North Fork Protection Act and the Forest Jobs and Recreation Act, and because these were developed by Montanans coming together and not being pushed down from people back here in Washington, D.C. or people in California. These were made in Montana solutions where people came to the table and worked their issues out. On your freight question, the one thing we can do that I support is extending the short line railroad tax credit, which is currently pending a vote in the Senate, and help smaller businesses expand rail access. On BNSF, I've written a letter along with Senator Tester a few months ago urging BNSF to do a better job and to communicate across the state of why we were having the backlog in commodities moving on the rail versus moving oil and energy resources. And that's also one reason that I support the Keystone Pipeline. Right now we're moving oil, coal, and other commodities via truck and train. If we were able to, move the oil through the pipeline, which would reduce energy consumption, which is something we want to do, but it would also alleviate some of the pressure on the train and rail system, and they would be able to, then move commodities quicker by freight. I know how tough it is to be a captive shipper, and we need to make sure that we are making that competitive. So thank you very much for the question.
As a reminder, if you'd like to ask Senator Walsh a question tonight, press 0 to get in line. Our next question this evening comes from Patrick in Livingston. Patrick, go ahead with a question for Senator Walsh. Patrick, we don't hear you, but you are live on the line.
Good evening. My question is... Okay. Good evening. My question is, what is your position on Obamacare?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a question that we hear an awful lot about. I'm very disappointed that we haven't seen, costs come down. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, that was the intent, that we would see health care costs come down. Over the past 10 or 15 years, we've seen health care costs go up pretty significantly, 10, 15% over that time frame. And so we need to do something to reform health care in this country and to bring health care costs down. And we can't have a top-down DC solutions to all of our problems. So I'm glad that people with pre-existing conditions, for example, my wife is a diabetic, and we were always concerned about her not, if I were to lose my job or my health care coverage, that she would lose her health care coverage because she wasn't, because of her pre-existing condition. I also have a son who's 24 years old who can stay on my health care policy until he's 26. But we need to make sure that we have protections and that people like my son can stay on their parents' insurance. But we must do more to bring down healthcare costs. So I'm open to, the intent is, I believe, to be able to provide quality, affordable health care for all of our citizens. And until we see that whether or not the Affordable Care Act is the tool that will help us do that, I'm not going to say that I support it or that I do not support it. I think it's still too early to determine whether or not the costs are actually going to come down. We're seeing reports that the costs are leveling off, but are they leveling off and coming down enough to where the average citizen can afford to buy quality, affordable health care? Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Senator. Our next question comes from Patricia in Victor. Go ahead, Patricia. You can ask your question.
Hi, Senator Walsh. I have a question and an explanation real quickly. Specifically, I would like to know what you are willing to do to assist veterans who worked in the Philippines and were affiliated with Ranch Hand to receive their Agent Orange benefits. They've been formally acknowledged as exposed by congressional hearing, by the Air Force, by the Ranch Hand study scientists, yet they have since been ignored and must prove they participated, as are all others exposed out to Agent Orange outside of Vietnam. Our application was 6 inches thick, and I have a degree and can do research. I don't see that the typical Air Force former personnel are going to be able to do what I had the luxury to do for 2 years by studying for our application.
Well, that's unfortunate that you've had to do that and take that kind of time. And what I would rather do is have my staff follow up with you, and we can get the details and follow up on your case. The one thing that I'm also upset that our veterans that are in the VA healthcare system or deserving of VA healthcare benefits, that it's taking so long and that there's a backlog in the time that they can be seen. And so I'm happy that the Senate was able to pass a bipartisan bill to address the outrageous backlogs. Within that bill, I recommend that a commission be developed. We call it the Commission on Care. And what that commission will do will help identify ways the VA can improve care. It will be an independent commission with a focus on our rural communities and help bring outside of government ideas to the table to provide better care for our veterans. I've served for 33 years in the Montana National Guard. I deployed to Iraq for over, about a year. We were on Title 10 orders for about 18 months. So I want to make sure that the men and women who deployed with me, plus Montana, we're the second per capita in the country with the number of veterans in our state, and I want to make sure that all those veterans and their families receive the health care that they've earned and that they deserve. So I'll continue to be working on that, and we are also having our staff every Wednesday at the Billings VA and the Fort Harrison VA to talk to people about what their issues and concerns are, so that we can try to help them out. I want to work with people that are having problems like yours to help them maneuver through this bureaucratic system. So we'll be in touch, and hopefully we can solve your problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Our next question this evening comes from Bob in Dillon. Bob, you are on the line with the Senator, and you can ask your question.
Hi, Senator. I may be preaching to the choir here, but it seems to me that you could emphasize some of the good things the federal government does, and not only nationwide but here in Montana. I recently looked on a website, a BLM website that covers it, and I found that about 1.5 to 2 times the amount of taxes that are collected by the federal government in Montana come back to us. That is, we get 2 times what we are taxed. Some of this fits in with the public land issue. I have not heard anyone recently state that public lands pay taxes. It's called payment in lieu of taxes, and the federal government is a very good taxpayer. And one of the reasons a lot of the times these lands don't get sold is the taxes would disappear to county and local governments and the states. And in terms of that, I would also suggest that instead of selling public lands, there are times when it is beneficial to the public and private industry to trade federal lands. There may be some very important watershed or recreation or wildlife fish lands, and you could trade timberlands that are not fulfilling that purpose. And the result is the private industry can go ahead and do their logging, but they also are going to pay the taxes. Anyway, those are a few suggestions I have, and thank you for your service. I also think we should continue to emphasize that the federal government provides the best military in the world, and we have not been invaded successfully for very long, since the War of 1812. And one of the things I would sure like to do is keep the military strong.
All right, Bob. You bet, Bob. Thank you for your comments. And I agree that I don't support selling public lands. Like you mentioned, public lands in Montana generate hundreds of millions of dollars in mineral revenue and billions in tourism. So I strongly support smart public land through programs like LWCF that make sense and improve access to public lands. So we are going to continue to focus on that. I also strongly support the PILT funding, like you mentioned, the payment in lieu of taxes. And I in addition, support a strong national defense, although I think our defense budget right now is, over the next year, is going to be about $596 billion. That's more than the next 10 countries combined spend on defense. Not to say that we should spend less, but I think that we can really take a look at how we are spending our dollars. And that's why I've introduced one of the bills in it's called the CUTS Act, to reduce our contract spending. We've spent over $2 trillion on contract services over the last, since 2002. I think we really need to take a look at all the programs that we've implemented since 9/11 to make sure that those programs are still needed. But to cut benefits and do things like that on the backs of our men and women is not the right answer. I will also focus on making sure that we strengthen national security, because it's important. There are a lot of threats out there. People want to attack us on the homeland, and we need to make sure that we have the capability and the intelligence assets not to allow that to happen. So thank you for your comments. Well, with that, I just want to thank everyone for being on this call. I appreciate the questions. It's been a lot of great questions tonight. Thank you for the important work that you're doing around the state of Montana. It's always good to hear directly from people around the state. Everywhere I go in Montana, I hear from folks like you asking me to make responsible decisions so that we can create jobs, protect our freedoms, and hold Washington accountable, and cut wasteful government spending. So thanks to your input, we are getting it done, and we're doing it responsibly, without hurting the things that are important to Montana's veterans, seniors, and our children, and we're protecting the freedoms we should never take for granted. So if you feel that you didn't have an opportunity to get your question in tonight, please feel free to give my office a call at 406-761-1574, and we would be happy to answer your question anytime throughout the day. You can also send me an email by going to my website at www.walsh.senate.gov. Thanks again for your time, and stay in touch. Take care.